Brothers and sisters, today we celebrate the feast of St. Francis de Sales, who is a doctor of the church, one of the great spiritual masters of the spiritual life, who wrote in such a way for spirituality for everyone, not just say for monks and nuns, but he wrote treatises that became very popular in his time, that was widely read by lay people. And he wrote in a way that made the heights of spiritual union with God accessible to everyone, or certainly opened up their appetite for prayer with God. And to see that prayer and the search for God is not something separate from our duties, from our regular life. In fact, it's in the as St. Teresa of Avila herself would say, we meet God in the pots and pans as well, as she would speak to her own sisters in community. And the same thing with St. Francis de Sales. You know, he would say that true devotion, devotion for Christ, in fact, makes rich our own work, embellishes it, you know, whether it be our different states in life, like if we are married and if we have families. True devotion to Christ doesn't take us away from our family. It brings us to the family. It allows us to serve Christ in them. True real devotion allows us to fall more in love with our family. So our faith and our religion doesn't take us away from our central identity. If I, for example, as a religious or priest, were to pursue a life that took me away from the core call of my religious life, then even if it was under the auspices of something holy or you know, some kind of devotion, it would be a false devotion. And this is what St. Francis de Sales would say. And same thing with people in the world, with work. If you are preoccupied with things that are taking you away from your central duties to be a good employee or a good boss or whatever it is, then you would have to reassess yourself and say, am I really doing God's will? And you know, at the burning heart of this spiritual life, it should be, and we should ask God for this deep desire that he's so willing to grant, and he has the grace to give to us, that we seek his will above all things, even above our own notions and ideas of holiness. Sometimes our own ideas of holiness, our own ideas of prayer can be a real barrier and a block between us and the good God, between us and God where God wants us. And so sometimes we have to learn how to leave certain forms of prayer. We have to learn how to leave certain ideas of holiness to pursue the living God who's moving us, who's drawing us to new pathways with him. And so we have to have that courage to go with him. But like I said, you know, true devotion, St. Francis de Sales would say, is, and I'll probably just best read something that he says. He says, moreover, just as every sort of gem cast in honey becomes brighter and more sparkling, each according to its color, so each person becomes more acceptable and fitting in his own vocation when he sets his vocation in the context of devotion. So that is the prayer life, the love for Christ, love for God. Through devotion, your family cares become more peaceful. Mutual love between husband and wife becomes more sincere. The service we owe to our superiors, to our bosses, to become more faithful. And our work, no matter what it is, becomes more pleasant and agreeable. And so he goes on to say, call it even a heresy to wish to exclude God and devotion from our, our works in shops, our works in the workplace, etc., etc. And he says, in whatever situations we happen to be, we can and we must aspire to the life of perfection. And that's what it means by devotion. Devotion means to seek the perfection of God's love, to seek to keep God above all things, seek to do all the little things throughout the day for God. In many ways, Saint Josemaria Escriva, Saint Teresa of Lisieux, many of the saints in the last century would kind of reiterate this spiritual wisdom, but we see it really much here in St. Francis de Sales. And in many ways, he was like the people's theologian, the people's doctor, because people found it so accessible and encouraged them greatly to the heights of prayer. and that to see their ordinary way, their ordinary life, as a means of finding great deep union with God, finding Christ in the midst of those things. But he has so much wisdom, so encouraging, that one of the things that, that I always remembered, he says that sometimes he allows souls, God allows souls to fall and to experience weakness of sin so that they won't commit pride, and that God could allow that to work a greater good of humility. And so people who may have struggled with weaknesses or struggling on their spiritual life can take great confidence and courage that God is doing a greater work if they long for God, if they're continuing to look for God. So here's a quote: "Above all else, do not lose your courage, but be patient, watchful and ready with a spirit of compassion. God will hold you in his hand, and if he lets you stumble, it will only be so that you realize that you would collapse entirely if he did not hold you, and thus to make you tighten your grip upon his hand."